about 7 or 8 years of service as a volunteer at Tremont and C.A. Jacobs and any other building that he could get into. And a lot of time and sacrifice put in service of Dominic, but all the kids in schools. So, Joe, thank you, sir, and we're thinking of you. So that's it for me.
Yeah, I remember I first met Joe when he invited me out to lunch. It was Burger King, and he had a coupon, so he paid for my lunch. But so from that day, when I first met him, to literally up to the day he died, he was true to himself and he didn't change. So
Yep.
Yeah, he'll be missed.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Okay, public comment. Persons wishing to introduce a topic within the subject matter jurisdiction of the district and not on the agenda may do so at this time. By law, subjects not on the agenda cannot be acted upon by the board except to briefly respond, clarify, or refer to staff for review and presentation at a future meeting. Comments will be limited to 5 minutes per person to a maximum of 25 minutes per topic unless extended by the board president.
Any public comment?
Any public comment?
On agenda items? Nope.
Okay, seeing none. So information, discussion, and action. I'm John Calise.
Let's jump in.
Okay, so good evening again. The first item is actually the presentation from our architects on the assessment and finding, and it's in regards to our architectural services agreement. So with that, I'm actually just going to pass it over to them. I'm going to bring up to the podium Jim Kissel and Anthony Harris from LPA Architects, and they're the architectural firm that we had chosen to work on the modernization of Old Dixon High. So we'll cue up the presentation, and it's all them.
Thank you, John. Good evening, board members, Superintendent Dolan, district staff, and community. My name is Jim Kissel, and I'm Principal and Director of School Planning for LPA. Also with me tonight is Anthony Harris as a Managing Director with LPA and would be the single point of contact throughout the life of the Old Dixon High School project. We have a short presentation tonight that we'd like to share with you, just a very, very brief overview of who is LPA. Description of the facilities assessment process we went through to develop the cost for the Old Dixon High School conversion, and then description of the scope of services and the scope of work for the Old Dixon High School proposed. First of all, the team that would be on your project is myself as the principal, Tony as the managing director, and Kelly Angel as a project architect. This project would be based out of our Sacramento office. Just a little bit about LPA. We've been in business for 50 plus years. In 2015, we celebrated our 50th anniversary. We have about 350 people between all our offices, and over half our staff is dedicated to educational facilities. So we work with school districts up and down the entire state. We also believe in practicing an integrated approach to our projects. LPA in-house includes landscape architects, interiors, and we bring the engineers that we work with as well into the same collaborative process. We believe it's important, and Tony will talk a little bit more about the facilities assessment that we did to do that at the very beginning of the project, when your ability to shape the outcome is greatest with the least impact to cost. As we move through the development of a project, the cost to change in a solution or cost to change an outcome goes up exponentially over time. So we want to try to make as many decisions, informed decisions, at the very inception of a project. We also, when we want to start a project, really want to keep in mind what are the guiding principles of the district, what is your educational mission, how are you going to use the facilities, so we can understand how our teachers are going to teach, how our students are going to learn, and how do we design the best educational environments that represent those goals. That was done in terms of part of our assessment. We walked the site with the superintendent to better understand the educational uses for each space so we could put appropriate cost to each of the program areas within the campus. I'll turn it over to Tony, and he'll talk a little bit about the facilities assessment process.
Good evening. My name is Anthony Harris. I think I'm referred as Tony for tonight's presentation. The old high school, Dixon High School, it's a facility that was closed back in 2007. and the purpose is to have it reopen as a 6th to 8th grade middle school. The objective is to have a facility that is ready for students and that is career college prep for them, and that is directly linked to the Dixon High School programs. Let's see. I don't have my glasses, so I'm just going to go by memory. The overview of the facility assessment, the process itself is, the first stage is really research and having meetings with the facilities department, in this case with John Calice's assistant and a facilitator of information and access to the existing campus. The buildings that were involved in these facility assessments are building A, B, and C, the gym building, the multi-purpose and small classroom, the music building, and we also included the quad restrooms in the process. The major components that we target during these assessments are building codes, accessibility, path of travel, technology, fire, life, and safety, and status of the building based on their age. The scope of work includes the research of the existing documents that were facilitated to us, meaning plans from previous modernizations or original plans for some buildings. We then go and do a site visit. In this case was done with the assistance of John Calice, our engineers, architects. We walked the site for a full day. So we got in shape that day, I guess, for the next 30 days that we were working on this project. The next part of the process was to prepare a report, and then based on that report, the estimators on all the findings are preparing a historical database of costs based on square footage, the findings of accessibility, building status, proposed curriculum that will take place in the building facilities. The timeline for this process was basically 4 weeks. And I'd like to mention that it's a huge effort to do a facility assessment, not only in this time frame, is on existing buildings. The people that were involved in this process, they are all experienced seasoned engineers and architects. Kelly, the project architect, he's almost 17 years experience. I go all the way to 30. And all the engineers were an average of 20 years experience walking these buildings. So when we walk, our set of eyes are ready to what we're seeing or walking at the same time. We walk the buildings with John and their staff, and we open literally every door that it's involved in these buildings, except one door that we identified later, but has been updated in the report to reflect it. It was a fun exercise, but I'd like to mention that behind the scenes, in order to prepare a report like this, it took the effort of 5 engineers, 2 architects, 2 estimators, and 2 designers. That in a span of 3 weeks. So it's a huge effort to put a report that the one that is presented, but the idea is that you have a document that you can rely on. So it's not just a pretty picture, it's an X-ray of your facilities. With the reports and the findings, this is the outcome. It's disclosed by building and based on existing conditions. The only conditions that are not assessed are things that we cannot see. Everything is based on visual exposed elements. And we don't go into structural because we don't have access to it. So that's the only component that cannot be verified on a walk. Other than that, everything was included in the report. I will pass this now to Jim.
So the total was about $13.9 million when we looked at the entire facility. The one space we missed was the girls' locker room. And because the door was hidden around the corner, so we got access to that space later and updated the estimate. But we were at $13.9 million total construction cost. I should say that those construction costs were escalated to anticipated midpoint of construction. And the assessment that we did for this was way beyond the level that you would typically do for any master planning effort, because we wanted to give the district a high degree of confidence in the cost. We know this is an escalating bid market. We wanted to make sure up front that we were doing our due diligence to anticipate as much as we possibly could without actually getting into destructive testing. That would be to open up the walls and things like that. So following the completion of the assessment, we met with Superintendent Dolan and your facilities director, John Calise, for really about a half-day meeting to walk through the costs. And the costs are broken down by all the different building systems, all the different types of construction that would be going on, and to really make the prioritization a little bit easier. And what you see before you is a proposed scenario that we would like to move forward on after our discussions with the district. Basically doing buildings A, B, and C, the primary classroom buildings, to their full assessment level of scope of work. So putting the focus on the classroom spaces to do them at 100%. I would say in all the buildings we want to be careful that we don't exceed 50% of the replacement cost as the division of the state architect would calculate it, because if we exceed 50% of the replacement costs, they trigger mandatory code upgrades to today's code. It doesn't mean the buildings are deficient for when they were built, but we would want to avoid updating to today's code because that triggers a lot of additional costs that the district doesn't need to bear. So we're proposing basically building A, B, and C at full facilities needs assessment scope. Then the next buildings, we really gave them a design to budget. So the NPR and small gym building would be about $500,000. The music building, $250,000. The gymnasium building, $500,000. The quad restroom would be done to its full scope, and the site development would be done to its full scope. This is primarily completing the fire loop, as well as handicap parking and other path of travel issues that we would need to address. Results in about $9.1 million in terms of total construction costs. We then worked with the district and looking at those scopes to really try to identify areas where perhaps the district could do some of the work themselves. And this was actually an earlier version of the presentation. There's two numbers that aren't on here. One was the conversion of the existing home ec room to a faculty workroom. That can be done pretty much with district staff, and so that we didn't roll that into the construction scope because it's mainly about removing some casework and then doing the flooring to convert that to a staff lounge. So that didn't need to be within our services. And I forgot what the second item was. Here, actually, give me 1 second. It's the front entry drop-off.
That's right.
It doesn't have a budget right now, but potentially as we go through the project, if we can find some extra dollars and efficient in other areas, the addition of a front entry drop-off. So that's in there right now as a $0 item. And then two other items that were pulled out for district expense is updating the gym bleachers at about $85,000. And we'll confirm that cost more as we go through schematic design and get a better handle on what actually the issues with those bleachers are. And then also the Building A re-roofing at about $350,000. Interestingly, our estimate was very close to an estimate that John had previously done to address Building A roofing. And so that's a project that can't wait and needs to move ahead before we go through another rainy season and do more damage to the building. So the district would proceed ahead on those immediately. So we're at a construction budget for the scope that LPA would do of about $8.665 million. I should say the district is budgeting, there's an additional furniture and equipment budget that the district's carrying, as well as 20% soft costs. That 20% soft cost is very lean from what we see with many districts. It'd probably be one of the most efficient that we've worked with. So that's a compliment to the district on running this project efficiently. So using the $8.665 million as the construction budget, and then using the contract that we have in place with the district, there was actually an exhibit. We had already previously negotiated the entire contract except for the exhibit, and they had the attorney had sampled language in there, part of which was using what was formerly the state architect's sliding fee scale for modernization to determine our fee. So we used that number to establish LPA's fee. This is not proposing to keep the sliding scale going to construction, meaning whatever it bids, even if it bids high, our fee goes up. We're proposing that this is a fixed fee, and actually the contract amendment that we prepared says this is a fixed fee for the project, would include LPA services, our engineering. It's basically a comprehensive services fee. So with that, that is our presentations. Oh, sorry, I missed one item. The schedule. We're starting here today. We're in early May 2017, the red square being the board meeting here for May 4th. We're proposing to go immediately into schematic design, then submitting to DSA in end of October, November of this year. And then you can see that purple bar is the DSA plan check. It's one of the longest time frames in the entire schedule, but we hope we've been conservative here. The green bar after that is bidding, and then construction, 12 months. And if everything falls smoothly, to reopen the school in the fall of 2019. The other thing is, and John's going to be talking about this in a minute, the potential bringing on of a contractor to participate with us. We are going to be continuing to do cost estimating throughout the entire life of the project. So at each milestone, we will be re-verifying the budget. If the district brings a contractor on board, and there's some talk that could be in mid-June, that would be a perfect timing to pair with us right at the end of schematic design. They do their own estimating as well, so it's good to have a little creative tension in the team and do a reconciliation of the numbers from both perspectives. They're going out to the bid community. We're using an estimator who is estimating based on their professional expertise. So that would be a perfect time in mid-June to have the contractor on board when we're finishing the first milestone and really working throughout the life of the project to confirm the costs. So with that, that is our presentation, and open to any questions that the board might have.
I have a question with respect to the 50% replacement cost. How do we assure that we don't go over that, and what are the ramifications if we do?
And maybe we could restate it. This is a concept that took me a moment or two to fully understand. So, layman's terms, let's recharacterize this scary this scary prospect because it could drive costs just through the roof. Who wants to take a shot?
I'll take it.
Go, Tony, go. No glasses required.
All right. Well, I guess there are multiple components to control that. One is the checks and balance on each milestone. But before we even get into a project, we will set up a meeting with DSA in this schematic phase. That's where we go and sit down with the regional manager of the office, the lead access and fire life architect, and then the structural engineer. And we basically sit down and tell them this is what we're going to do. And it's a conversational meeting, but during that conversation, what we try to tell them is this is our vision, this is our plan, this is our timelines, and these are our concerns. So what are DSA's concerns and points of view of what we're going to do? So we have that interaction. And during that meeting, is specifically on this scope of work that we're going to do, we're going to ask DSA how we're going to establish the baseline for the replacement value of the building. So in that meeting, we will have that approach or formula, and then we will have a consensus between DSA and us as design and district, and that will set that bar. And once we have that bar, it's just a matter of once we start the production to keep those checks and balances below that bar all the time. That's how it's controlled.
What are the penalties, so to speak, for lack of a better word, if we were to go over that?
Well, there's not really a penalty. It's really just an enforcement of code. Once we pass that threshold, then we need to do seismic retrofit in all the buildings that go beyond that percentage or baseline that is established. So what it means to you is if they ask for a seismic retrofit, then we need to prove to the district that prove to the DSA, excuse me, that the existing facilities meet current seismic code. So that's why we need to be very careful in not exceeding that baseline.
And if you get into this, so let's say there's I'm going to try this another way for lay folks watching. Let's say that DSA, the ballpark of a $5 million replacement cost, right? So it's imperative that we remain below $2.5 million. If you exceed that $2.5 million, and there's all this negotiation and back and forth, and these folks have a really good model of engaging with DSA on the front end, but let's say we end up at a $3 million figure on expenses there, then what it means is that every piece of code in that building we have to evaluate to see if we have to upgrade to current code.
As if it were a newly built building?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's not a penalty per se, except the fact that you might be spending millions of dollars potentially, depending on the age of the building and size of the building and conditions and all those kinds of things. So the management of this process is really critical. You need to, it is our intent. We asked voters to pass Measure Q because we wanted to modernize and rehabilitate that building to occupy. The irony is, you could get in there and do too much in a building that could trigger this massive additional level of expense by having to get into some of the areas that are not, in the scope of the current project, never were intended to be.
So that's why we have your expertise and why you meet with them up front.
That's
and
why
watch all
we
that.
talk with DSA up front. The success of this process is communication. We need to go up front with them and tell them this is what's going to happen, tell us what's the concerns, and then all the cards are on the table. There are no surprises.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Other questions?
Nope.
So with that, a couple of things that I just want to highlight real quick, and then I'm going to ask for the approval of their contract.
We'll go in public comment before.
yeah.
Yep.
Yes, sorry. So first of which is soft costs, which Jim talked a little bit about, but I know that we had made a commitment originally to not exceed 30%. Right now, we are looking at soft costs running at about 20%. We are really, really on the low end. Another thing to talk about is there are unknown variables. Jim talked about this as well. So our construction costs right now, those are estimates. Until we actually get into hard construction, there are variables that we will not know about. And I know that you recognize that, but I just want to be completely transparent in saying that on the record. Lastly, when we look at LPA's price, because of the fact that this is a fixed contract price, even with those variables and then basing it on the sliding scale, formerly of the DSA, I really feel like we're on the low end of that scale. And their price for this scope of work with all engineering and everything else included definitely seems to be favorable, and it seems to be the right way to go for the district and this project. So with that, I will step aside if anyone has any comment. So, thank you.
Okay. So is there any public comment on this? Okay.
Joe Dingler, please clarify for me. Are these fellows suggesting that if that magic trigger of 50% is reached, then it engenders the current earthquake standards? Is that correct?
I'm not sure of your question, Joe. That it
It triggers, it kicks the
yes,
current earthquake standards.
Not just seismic. Every piece of code that it would apply to a new school construction.
So, but if you don't reach that trigger point,
You are not obligated.
then you're going to rebuild this building to a standard when the building was built, not current standards. You're talking about putting kids in a building that was built before even seismic codes were in place. Is that what you're suggesting, fellas?
Absolutely, Joe. Yeah, yeah, and I will tell you that that's the standard across the state and probably country when it comes to modernization projects. Is you're not building a new school, so the bulk of your structural elements are not touched during a modernization project. If they were, we wouldn't have asked for a $30 million bond. We would have needed 7 times that probably.
Well, that's what the consultants told you before you put the bond on the ballot. They told you you'd need a lot more than you're talking about spending. My second question goes to the total. I heard 3 different numbers and some soft numbers. I didn't get a total. Did you hear a total? Could anybody tell me what the total was?
Total of the Dixon High School project?
Yeah.
About 13.4.
Yeah, but there was another figure of almost $9 million.
Yes.
What was
So,
that for?
If I may. So the figures that you saw up there, the 9.1 is what LPA has actually estimated our construction budget at, but there are some projects that will be done by the district prior to LPA coming in and doing construction, or the construction firm coming in, and we talked about that. That's the roofing of A-Wing. That's the $1.5 million that we have set aside for furnishings. That's soft costs. That's also the bleachers for the gym. These are projects that the district will take on outside of those construction costs.
In addition to that $13.9 million?
No. In addition to that 8.16 that they're showing, when it's all said and done, it's that 13.5. In response to your first question, as far as the safety goes, just so you understand, all schools, in order for them to be schools, they have to be compliant and they have to meet what's called the Field Act. So I understand your concern as far as the seismic retrofitting. However, if they weren't safe, they would not be able to meet the Field Act, and we wouldn't be able to operate them as schools. It's a matter of building them to a standard that is safe, but not necessarily to the 2017 codes.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Okay.
Thank you.
So you're saying the engineers and architects and contractors that do the work, they do still examine, make sure the buildings are safe?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
But it's not the current standard.
Not up to current code?
Okay.
And are any
Joe, I heard you say that we didn't answer your question, so I don't want you to go away unless we have.
Well,
I
I didn't have my calculator for all those numbers, so
Okay.
I'm not up to speed on that.
Yeah, and this presentation is available online through the district website, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
maybe I'll do a little more research there. But it is then clear that we're not building these to current seismic standards,
Absolutely correct.
unless that 50% number is triggered. And if overruns happen, it could happen. What do you do with the project half finished? That's rhetorical.
Yes, thank you. That's why I didn't answer.
and all of our schools meet the Field Act,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And none of our schools today meet the 2017 seismic safety standards.
Correct.
Okay.
Or the building we're in now.
Or the building we're in right now, yeah. Thank you, George.
Good evening. My name is George Gwynn. I'm the current president of the Solano County Taxpayers Association. And the Solano County Taxpayers Association, on behalf of itself, its individual members, and the taxpayers of the Dixon Unified School District, requests the board vote no on this agenda item. Education Code Section 15278A requires the district to appoint a citizens bond oversight committee within 60 days of the date the governing board enters in its minutes the fact that the certificate of election results show voter approval of the bond measure. Measure Q was approved by the voters in November 2016, yet the district is yet to appoint a complete 7-member citizen bond oversight committee. The district is in breach of the mandatory duty imposed by the Local School Construction Bond Act of 2000. The stated purpose of the act is for taxpayers to directly participate in oversight of bond expenditures. The legislature expressly intends that the oversight committee promptly alert the public to any waste or improper expenditure of school construction bond money. An oversight committee cannot evaluate a contract in which the district proposes spending almost $864,000 of bond funds for an architectural services contract, which there is no oversight committee in place. Entering into this contract without the mandated oversight committee in place completely contradicts the Act. Education Code Section 15824 provides a right of action to restrain and prevent any willful expenditure of bond proceeds when a school district willfully fails to appoint a citizen oversight committee. As such, the Solano County Taxpayers Association, on behalf of itself, its individual members, and the taxpayers of the district, hereby demands the district cease and desist from taking any further actions relative to expenditure of the bond proceeds, including but not limited to soliciting or entering to any contracts to be funded thereby unless until there is a full compliance with section 15278A. If the district proceeds to solicit and or enter into any contracts or take other action relative to the expenditure of the bond proceeds prior to having a citizens bond oversight committee in place, is at risk of litigation by Solano County Taxpayers Association and or other taxpayers. And once again, I hope you guys vote no on this agenda item until corrective action is taken. Thank you very much.
If you'd like, I can offer a response to the concern.
Please do.
So the function of the Citizens Oversight Committee is not to pre-approve expenditures. It's to review them on a periodic basis. As is well documented, I failed to get our COC up on a timely basis. We were several days late. And we have, at each meeting since then, actually added additional members, and we're doing that again tonight. We are in an absolute good faith position here of trying to get to the full 7-member magic number, and it can exceed that. We sent several members of the committee to the CalBach training that was last week or the week before, 4 schools, so 4 community citizens oversight committees. And so while I understand the concern about the timeliness of our forming, as we have been informed by legal counsel, there is no prohibition on spending bond dollars prior to any kind of approval of a Citizens Oversight Committee. It's not the role of the committee. They serve as oversight, as kind of auditors of a sort, I suppose you could say, and don't have that pre-approval authority.
So legal counsel has indicated we can't enter into these contracts
Yes.
with the current status of the committee.
Yes.
And the committee has been put into place. We just don't have the positions full yet.
I think tonight we're at member number 5, right? Yeah. Tonight's our 5th, the appointment of our 5th member. And we continue to solicit, and we continue, we thought we might have one more application for this evening, and that one didn't come into the office in time to be included. So on May 18th, I think we'll be here and hopefully filling the final 2 spots.
Do we have all of the required designated positions for groups that we have to have?
We have solicited them. I don't recall that we have a Chamber of Commerce or Downtown Dixon Business representative yet. We have asked both organizations to encourage a member to apply. The person we approve with your vote later tonight is actually a business owner in town, and I would guess is probably a member of the Chamber of Commerce. And that would be, I don't have a follow-up question. If she is, if we could ask the Chamber to designate her as a representative from that group.
So I guess from the comments of the Taxpayers Association, the way I'm taking them is irrespective of whether the committee's been set up or not, if we couldn't find one of those positions, we would never be able to spend any money on anything.
I'm not going to answer.
Am I interpreting your position correctly? Okay, thank you. But council has indicated that it's his legal opinion we can enter into these contracts even though we're still working on filling those positions. Correct?
Yep, correct.
Okay. Are there any more public comments on this matter? Okay. Seeing none, this is an action item, so is there a motion to approve the architectural service contract?
I'll move approval.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye as well. And so, John?
Thank you.
Leaseback request?
Okay, so thank you. So yeah, at the last board meeting, we talked about different delivery methods, and we talked about the recommendation of the facility subcommittee that it was to use the leaseback method for delivery of this project. You had asked me to work with our legal counsel to make sure that we can be ironclad on this, and that's what this is about. So last July, with the help of one of our consultants, we did an RFQ for contractors regardless of what the delivery method was. We actually pre-qualified 2 contractors, but in talking to our legal counsel, what they had indicated is that it actually should have been a full RFP. So typically we don't vet RFPs here, but because it's leaseback, did you want to?
RFP, request for proposal.
Sorry.
Yep.
RFP is request for proposal, and what
And
we have
RFQ
done,
is request for qualifications.
request for qualifications. I apologize. So what legal counsel had advised was actually to bring this RFP to you guys for the board to actually approve us using. In this, there is a timeline attached to this for all of the steps that have to happen. And then if this is approved, this RFP will actually go out on the street, so to speak, this coming Monday, May 8th. The special board meeting that Brian talked about was one of the things that we had found working with legal, and we just couldn't get the documents in time to have it on tonight, is there's some legal pre-qualification requirements, some paperwork that they would need to fill out in order to bid on this project. And there's timelines in place as far as how many days ahead of the actual bid delivery that they have to deliver that to the district. So what we need to do is, assuming that the board approves this RFP tonight, in order to stay on task and stay on timeline where we can have a contractor on mid-June to actually then begin working with LPA, it would be important to get our pre-qualification documents passed by the board, and that's what I'm looking to do on Monday. So sorry, I kind of stumbled there a little bit, but yeah, basically this RFP would allow us to go out to the street to look for the contractor. So this is and doing it this way, it does keep this as a fully transparent process when they come back with their numbers and their prices.
Okay. Are there any board comments or questions on this? Okay. How about public comment? Okay. Oh.
So I'm a little slow, but talk about RFPs. We're talking about the construction part. We're going to pre-qualify bidders, and then we're going to have a bid process, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What's the RFP? That's for architect services.
No, we have to do RFPs for a wide range of services, architects included.
Construction?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You don't bid on them?
Go ahead and explain it, John,
The
please.
request for proposal is just that. It is still going to be a bid with a leaseback scenario. What they come back with is a guaranteed maximum price. It is one of the easiest ways and the best ways to actually control the overall construction costs. We should see that in the RFP process, and then they actually get down to working with the architects in doing the pre-construction services, as well as their bidding on it to make sure that their numbers align. With the whole, the change in legislation over the last few years, you can no longer have a contractor come in and do these pre-construction services for a leaseback until you enter into that full agreement with them. So it's not that they're doing part of it under one contract and then the lease back under the other. The RFP covers both the pre-construction as well as the construction services. Does that answer your question, sir?
All right.
Thank you.
How many, while I'm here,
Sure.
how many design architects did you get
John,
proposals from?
Yeah.
Sure. So we actually initially got proposals from, it was either 7 or 8 who submitted. The short list to that, I believe, was 4 as far as who actually was qualified. And then those 4 were interviewed by a panel, and then the panel made the decision. Okay. And then we brought that decision to the board last July, I believe.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Gary.
If our committee was working, I'd be asking these questions
Absolutely
in the
right.
committee
Yep.
instead of coming here.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this is an action, so is there a motion to approve this proposal for lease-back?
I'll move approval.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye as well. Okay, the California Environmental Quality Act exemption, John.
Thank you. Last one, and I'm going to throw the acronym out there for fun now. It's CEQA. So CEQA is just that. It's California Environmental Quality Act. I had brought something very similar to this before you in December of 14 when we approved the contracts for solar. And what this is there is a management report attached to it that explains it. But basically, because of the fact that we're not adding to the school, and if you are, you're still allowed to stay under the threshold of 25%. But to avoid having to do an environmental impact study, school districts, LEAs, and other public agencies can exempt themselves. With that, the moment that if the board chooses to pass this resolution, there's 35 days from the date of this resolution that anyone can come in and actually request that a full CEQA report and study be done. That's just something that it's really not necessary for this project because of the fact that we're not adding to the building, and it's very costly and it's very timely to have that done. So this is really just a legal formality.
Okay. Are there any board questions on this? Public comment. Okay.
Good evening. My name's Ginger Emerson. I live in the older part of town and very impacted by the traffic conditions at the new high school, and can only imagine what reopening the old high school is going to do traffic-wise. And as a matter of fact, I brought this. Other individuals and I came before you when the bond was first being discussed. Was my understanding from the board members at the time that there was an understanding that there would be traffic issues that would need to be addressed, mitigated. I believe that CEQA is the process for doing that. How will that be done if you are adopting a resolution making yourselves or this project exempt from CEQA in regard to traffic, in regard to parking issues, in regard to, I think CEQA deals with historical type of aspects to things, all different types of things CEQA people can comment on in regard to CEQA. But I know, and if you look back at your previous meetings, I'm sure we can find, or I can find, the meeting where this board, some of you weren't members at the time, but the board at the time expressed an understanding that there would be some traffic concerns. And I'd like to know how you intend to address those.
Great question, and I'll address that first. Ginger, thank you. So CEQA is kind of the 300-pound gorilla, to use that analogy, and there are other means that we can use to address the traffic issues without addressing everything else in CEQA that really isn't, I don't want to use the word valid, but really probably isn't necessary given that it's an existing facility and we're not talking about turning ag land into a school facility or rezoning or any of those other kinds of things. So we've already had conversations with City of Dixon and their Public Works Department engineering folks on, well, we kind of are always engaged in conversations with them about traffic around school issues. And so we've begun conversations with them about this project, and we'll continue to have those, especially as our planning moves a little further along. As the architects mentioned, drop-off is a piece that we have not engaged in too heavily yet. So we will be working directly with staff from the city of Dixon, and they are whether we like them or not, whatever your opinion may be of them, they are the folks with whom we will be consulting and figuring out the best ways to mitigate the concerns that you have. I also know that there has been, I don't know if it's movement or not. You were probably at the meetings. I just read a newspaper article about it related to Parkway Boulevard and, maybe some progress towards funding there. And obviously that would help our whole situation with regards to travel to New Dixon High in particular. But there's also people who come out of the Pulte area, heading out other ways, right? So that's, no pun, it's a two-way street there. So we've already had contact with staff from City of Dixon. We will continue to have contact with staff from City of Dixon. It's more cost-effective and time-effective to do that than to go through a whole CEQA, especially when we're talking about an existing facility.
I have grave concerns. Where I live in the older part of town, if we impact A Street, like the school district has impacted First Street, we will be held hostage in our neighborhoods. There will be no way out. Absolutely no way out on East Broadway, East Mays Street, South 2nd Street, South 3rd Street, some of those streets, no way out. When you're having traffic on 113 during school hours, you're having traffic on A Street during school hours, I guess we'll have to be airlifted.
How were the traffic issues handled when that was a high school?
They were there, yeah.
There was really nothing substantially, thank you. There was really nothing substantially significant done with regards to traffic issues back then. I think the school was open and functioning by, when I arrived in Dixon. I can't remember us ever engaging with city staff or anyone else in a significant way about traffic. Police about enforcement activities, both around Dixon High School and Anderson occasionally, but I don't recall any traffic studies or any kind of modifications made.
But I can see kind of the complaint there, because now we have two major schools over there instead of just one.
Certainly.
Like you have the junior high and the high school. I can see how that would be congested.
But wasn't the anticipation, so correct me if I'm wrong, I live on that side of town too. The anticipation was when the new high school was put in that the city was going to continue the Park Boulevard, and it didn't happen.
Right.
I mean, so that was the original intent.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Right. Yeah. So, and obviously that's not in place, and city continues to work on it, and hopefully it'll be developed in the near future, but and that will provide some relief. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, Old Dixon High School is not yet open as our middle school campus, and certainly there are times where if it's 2:35 or 2:40 and I need to go to Anderson or Main Prairie, I walk instead of driving because I get there more quickly. Mm-hmm. Right? It's tough to get across the street or, through the stoplights or all those kinds of things. So those concerns are legitimate. If I'm driving whether north or south on First Street and looking at First and C, and how difficult it is for people to get off of C Street onto 113 heading north or south, those issues are there and already there without us reopening. Part of these things can be addressed, through staggered start times. You're not going to have both schools start at the exact same time, even three schools starting at the exact same time. You stagger the start times, and that reduces the number of cars out on the road at any one time. Perhaps it also extends the window of time that there's traffic to be fully, fair and accurate about it. So the traffic, especially down in this part of town, is an issue, whether we do anything more or not, but we will continue to work with city staff on making sure that we're able to do all we can to mitigate.
What are the other things that CEQA is looking for that we will be bypassing if we...
It's just the overall environmental impact. So if you were, it really triggers us where we couldn't be exempt, and that's the perfect way to explain it, is if we were adding to the facility greater than 25% what's already there, which we're not doing. We're actually removing, if we looked at square footage, I don't know what the percentage is, but when you count the number of portables that we're removing from that site, it's actually quite the opposite. We're not building new construction, we're not putting in stadium lighting, that's a big one a lot of times, things like that, we're just simply not doing it. So.
Good evening again, Board and Superintendent. Previous speaker came up with some of the comments I have to make tonight, but I have additional ones that I'd like to mention. The Solano County Taxpayers Association objects to the district's proposed approval of Resolution 17-1567, finding that the Dixon Middle School project exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, otherwise known as CEQA. We request the board vote no on this agenda item. I'm submitting a 3-page letter, which you should have, with our objections, but I will summarize for the benefit of the audience. The proposed Dixon Middle School project is not exempt from CEQA for various reasons, including but not limited to the following. One, the proposed $9 million transformation of the current vacant old Dixon High School into a modern middle school for 900 students does not meet the negligible or no expansion of use beyond that existing at the time of the lead agency's determination requirement of CEQA. Guidelines section 15301. Presently, and for the last 10 years, the site has been a central kitchen and teen center. Use as a 900 student middle school is a significant change and expansion of the current and past use, which will have significant impacts. 2, the requirements of CEQA guidelines section 15314 are not met because the current capacity of the old Dixon High School is 0 students vacant since 2007, whereas the proposed capacity of the middle school is 900 students. 3, the requirement of CEQA guidelines section 15061B3 are not met because there is a possibility that the project may have a significant effect on the environment in various ways, including 2, A, destruction of historical architecturally significant items from a building that dates back to 1939. B, traffic, parking, and air pollution impacts associated with a 900-student campus in light of current traffic volumes in the area surrounding the project. C, air, water, stormwater pollution. D, the presence and potential release of hazardous materials, that is, lead paint, lead plumbing, asbestos, etc. E, light, glare, and/or noise from proposed modernization of buildings, playgrounds, sports facilities, and/or F, growth-induced impacts, cumulative impacts. Finally, the proposed project will require a grading demolition project from the County of Solano, which also triggers district's obligation to undertake environmental analysis under CEQA such that the proposed determination of exemption is improper. Based on the foregoing, we request you do not adopt the proposed resolution number 17-1567, finding the proposed Dixon Middle School project exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. Adoption of this proposed resolution and/or any other attempts by the district to proceed forward with the proposed project without full compliance with CEQA or other applicable California laws is subject to legal challenge. Again, I hope you will proceed to vote no on this particular project. Thank you very much.
And just point out that the resolution that is before the board for consideration tonight was prepared by legal counsel. Yeah. Certainly. Yeah, we weren't cutting off. Sure.
So just to respond to that, because that is what he had brought up was a concern of mine as well, and that was talked to about with legal counsel. Legal counsel has assured us that even though it is not operated as a site, it is not considered vacant. Yes, it has been used as a central kitchen, but it's actually a lot more. Main Prairie uses that site for the gymnasiums and the fields. Anderson Elementary uses that site, again, for the gymnasiums and the fields. The Teen Center operates out of there. There's also some community programs that operate out of there as well. So for all of those reasons, each one of those, according to our legal counsel, would actually qualify it as not a vacant site, and we have multiple. So it is our attorney's opinion on this that we are 100% right to do it this way. So.
I have one question. Wasn't like the asbestos, wasn't that already removed from our buildings?
The modernizations of 2000, 2001, around that period, did include abatement of lead and asbestos. I don't think any of us could stand and guarantee that every element of lead and asbestos was abated at that point in time. But should abatement be a component of this project in any way, it will be done in full compliance with all of the regulations that are present, and contracted, licensed contractors with all necessary state permitting would be the people doing that work.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve the CEQA exemption?
I think someone else wants
Joe
to
has.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Another.
No, we're not
go
closing
ahead.
public
Waiting
comment.
for you.
Go ahead, Pablo. Sorry.
Your comments earlier, per your attorney, have basically rendered the Oversight Commission toothless. And I challenged the principle of doing that even further by exempting yourselves from CEQA. CEQA, after all, is a community input process. Some of the mitigations that could be implemented would come from the public. And by closing that process off, you don't get participation from the community, which I think is exactly what you're looking for. And that's not fair.
Go ahead. You have another comment?
In regard to Mr. Dolan's comment that he walks, I walk as well. But there are older people in these
Certainly.
neighborhoods. There are people with young children. There are people who have to get to doctor's appointments. There are people who have to get to work. There are people who try to get their children to school and leave a great deal earlier than they would normally leave in order to navigate through the traffic that already exists. And you are proposing to add to that without any solutions, mitigation measures. Just saying that the city of Dixon is going to address this is not adequate. I think you're passing the buck. I think you have a responsibility. It's your facility. And when I stood here before you months ago, it was certainly my understanding that the board at that time understood that certain mitigation measures would need to be undertaken. I can't imagine and couldn't imagine then what they might be, but you proceeded with that promise, I'll call it, And there are going to be a great many people feeling very betrayed if you don't address that before you move forward with other aspects of this. People deserve to know how these issues are going to be addressed. We already have a long-standing problem which has not been addressed. There have been promises throughout the years about Parkway Boulevard, and as Mr. Dolan accurately assessed, we're going to have traffic coming in the other direction now. More traffic coming in the other direction because of people taking their children to the junior high. So what it basically amounts to is you have the one high school that serves the entire community, you have the one junior high that serves the entire community, impacting certain areas of town. Other areas of town don't deal with this, but one area of town in particular deals with the impacts and the future impact of both of those schools, which again serve the entire community, but burden mostly one part of the community.
Hi, Betsy.
Hi, board members. Everybody who hasn't seen me before, my name's Betsy Clackham. I have 2 young children. One currently goes to Tremont Elementary. I'm very happy that the bond measure passed. I am ecstatic that a historic building is going to be rehabilitated. I think it is the heart of the community. I think the children are the future of our community. And I'm really excited that we're moving forward. And I know a lot of parents who are really excited about it. So I know some people are unhappy, and I know that change is hard, but I would like to tell the board how excited I am that we're moving forward.
Thank you.
I just have one question for you, John. I mean, I was pretty sure that when we had the presentation from the architectural services, that in their presentation, it had about impact, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they're going to plan that into their...
They're going to look at that, and they'll recommend, and they'll work with Superintendent Dolan and Assistant Superintendent Walbridge as far as staggering drop-off times and different things that we can do, and even drop-off points. But ultimately, and it sounds terrible because it's not my intention to pass the buck, but we can't conduct those traffic studies, and we certainly can't build roads and change roads. You know, our job is within the confines of the boundaries of our property. So we're looking to do that. Now, I have been engaged with the city engineers for quite some time about this, and, you know, I understand that that's maybe disheartening to some, that, you know, there's not other things that are happening. And I can't speak to that as to why it isn't happening, or make promises as to what would happen from the town. The only thing that I can talk about really is what would happen, again, on our property. So,
I mean, really, we don't, as a school district, we don't have the power to, as you said, change the roads or change, add lights or whatever
and we can
it is.
We can work with the town, and I mean, Superintendent Dolan has a wonderful relationship with them, as do I, and, you know, we can definitely work with them, but ultimately, that's not something that we can do.
You know, the things we can control to help mitigate that would be the staggered start times at different schools, so that you wouldn't have everyone all at once.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Correct.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I think that it would be great for us in the future to explore, you know, obviously standard drop-off times, but, you know, other possibilities of what we can do to not have the impact be as great.
Sure.
Okay. So this is a resolution. Well, I guess I should say, is there any more public comment before we move on? Okay. So is there a motion to approve the CEQA exemption?
I'll move approval of the resolution.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. So this is a roll call. So go ahead.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So moving on. Superintendent?
Okay, so first, quick item. We did receive one more, as I mentioned previously, one more application to serve on the Citizens Oversight Committee. This is from Andrea Kett. Andrea had a child come through the school system. She is actually a certified public accountant, so a background with audits and such. A nice skill set to add to the group. So she did check off the box. Just a representative at large, but we will inquire if in fact she is a Chamber of Commerce member. She does own a business in town, and if so, if the Chamber could designate her as the representative from the business organization. So we just ask for your approval and add Andrea to our list.
And this puts us at member number 5?
Member number 5, yep. And we do have interest from a 6 and a 7,
Okay.
But have yet to have received their paperwork. But we'll hopefully have that for May 18th.
Okay. So are there any board comments on that? Any public comments? Okay, so approval of adding Andrea Kett to the Citizens Oversight Committee is...
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, update of board policies.
Okay, so we were here 2 weeks ago with the same slate of policies. That time, for a first read, at that time I told you that